Hello and welcome to the third week of the short story. This week we will be looking at some women writers. These are writers that wrote in the realistic vein. Realism was a literary movement that began in the early 19th century in Europe and became popular in America after the Civil War. In realistic writers wanted to portray the ordinary lives and commonplace events. So the first writer we're going to look at is Edith Wharton, who did not actually portray the lives of ordinary people primarily, though she did sometimes, but she is a realist, was the most distinguished woman writer really before 1940. If you see, she had six collection of short stories, five novels, four novellas. She won the Pulitzer Prize. She's someone who came from upper class New York, an aristocrat from old money New York. And in fact, her family, her ancestors appeared in Washington Irving's Histories of the Hudson River Valley. Her first book was not a work of fiction. It was a book about interior decorating called The Decoration of Houses, and it was extremely popular. In this book, she put forth the idea that people should decorate their houses not just according to the fashion of the elite or the aristocrats, but according to their own personal tastes. Her own house, one of her houses, but this is the one she lived at, country house in Lenox, Massachusetts, that is still there. I try to visit myself once a year or so, and it's beautifully decorated. And she built the house herself, designed it, and if you get a chance to visit it in Lenox, Massachusetts, you'll probably enjoy it very much. Now, her first work of fiction, novel that is, she had become popular. Her short stories were already popular, but The House of Mirth in 1905 is when she really gained her reputation as significant writer, significant novelist. And her pathetic heroine, Lily Bart, has come down to us as an important figure in literary history. She began in her works of fiction to be often critical of upper class society. She pierced the veil of kind of moral respectability and exposed the motivations of people that on the surface appeared to be respectable. And Ethan Frome, this is a wonderful example of American naturalism. And in this book, she portrays the life of a poor, impoverished farmer. The Age of Innocence is one of her masterworks. It appeared in 1920, and in 1921 she uh, received the Pulitzer Prize for that novel. So Wharton is just so important to American literature. I have a link to The Age of Innocence, which I hope will open. It's a trailer to a film. I just thought you would enjoy seeing some of the backgrounds, the way that it's filmed, the rich textures.
I want you to talk to me about May. Are you very much in love with her?
As much as a man can be.
Do you think there's a limit?
In a time of tradition, in a place of privilege, Newland Archer lived his life by the rules of his society.
I want everybody to know
What?
that we're engaged.
Until he met a woman who lived.
So I apologize for all of that kind of noisy background. Um, but this, I hope that that gave you a sense of the very opulent society in which many of her stories are set. Now, the journey is not so much so an opulent society at all. In fact, we're trapped on a train car with a young woman from a middle class background, and here she is traveling all the way from Colorado to New York. I happen to do that. There's New York. I happen to do that journey myself, and it takes several days. Here are some photographs of and illustrations of what it was like to travel at that time. in these train cars, it does become claustrophobic. And it's an interesting short story. Some critics have read it as an indictment, perhaps, of being trapped in marriage, being trapped in society. So that's an interesting take on the story. Perhaps we can discuss that more online. All right, our next writer, Kate Chopin, is considered a regional writer, though she has gained a real following among feminists. And you may have read The Awakening, her novel, which we'll talk about in just a second. Um, she was considered really a foremost Southern regionalist writer, born and raised in St. Louis. She married Oscar Chopin in 1870 and moved to Louisiana, to New Orleans. When her husband died in 1882, she was a young widow with 5 children, and she was left $12,000 in debt. She's a very strong, resourceful woman. She ran the family, continued to run the family business, and even had an affair with a married man. And this experience of being independent, about breaking societal rules, we see that reflected in her fiction, especially when you read The Storm. You can think about this, her own background. And she was really rediscovered in the 20th century by feminists who celebrated her work. She wrote about a society that was dominated by people of French descent, the Creoles, who are more of an upper class group or regarded themselves as such, and the Acadians, the current Cajuns kind of trace themselves to the Acadians. They were kind of more later comers. They came from French Canada and moved down to New Orleans. So it's very interesting. I've linked you to a history of Creole farmers. This was Kate Chopin's house. Unfortunately, it burned to the ground, which is very sad. But you get a sense of the architecture also. She had wrote, here's a first edition of a collection of her short stories, but Kate Chopin is most well known for The Awakening, and I'm going to try to show you um, a clip from a film based on her novel The Awakening, about a woman who feels trapped by society um, and escapes it, but I won't tell you how. So let's see if this will open up. I'm not sure that it will. Here we go. Let me just cue this up a little bit. Again, I apologize for some of this distracting images on the side of the screen.
Papa, the carriage is leaving. Papa, it's time to go.
And for you, my little ragamuffins.
Oops. Sorry about this. While this is queuing up, you can see.
There'll be a whole box of peanuts and fudge and goodness knows what all.
And money for me, too. Me too, Papa.
There'll be plenty of money for all of us. It's going to be a good week on the street. I can feel it.
Remember what you promised me, Papa.
Alors, hein? Be good, mes enfants.
Me too. Mama. Yes, wave goodbye. Bye, Papa. Bye, Dad.
Goodbye.
Are you all right?
Aha. So here you get a sense of the society um, in which Kay Chopin is writing about in the Grand Isle, and you'll see it in her writing, in her short story, the use of French and the dialect. All right, so now